Hello and welcome to episode 25 of the Verbal to Visual podcast. I am your host, Doug Neill, and on this show, you get to listen to one-on-one coaching calls that I have with folks who are developing and using their sketchnoting skills. Today, I'm chatting with Renz Klein, who is taking advantage of a 10-week break from a graduate program to focus on building his sketchnoting skills. We chat about how best to use the chunks of time that he has set aside for his sketchnoting work, and also what to do when you reach the point of information overload during a sketchnoting session. There's lots of relevant topics here for all sketchnoters, so I hope you enjoy it. Before we hop into that conversation, I wanted to let you know that if you'd like access to one-on-one coaching calls like what you're about to hear, then know that that's a perk of joining Verbal to Visual. When you sign up, in addition to getting access to all of our complete at your own pace online courses and weekly activities that allow you to do some work and connect with other sketchnoters, you also get access to one-on-one coaching calls with me. And I'd love to hear what you're up to. To learn more, check out verbaltovisual.com. And you can add a /25 to get to the show notes for this specific episode. Let's get into it.
So right now I'm in sort of a break period of my master's degree in humanistic studies, which is also why I'm following the course now.
Nice.
Because I feel like there is a way I learn better than I used to, and I'm a very visually oriented person, also because I'm dyslexic. I learn a lot better with images, graphs, colors. So I thought this is the time to start learning this.
Yeah.
Better late than never. Only the problem I often run into is that I'm very excited or enthusiastic to start this, but then I see this enormous amount of material and things I can learn that it's overwhelming, and I want to use this call to now break it down, go step by step. What are the things I should focus on now and help myself progress in a long period, and see it as a long period progress rather than trying to cramp it in this period where I have some free space.
Yeah. I love it. So a little bit of kind of like course setting, which I
Yeah.
think is a great place to start. And I guess kind of there's a unintended double meeting of course, since like within Verbal to Visual, there's, a handful. I think we have 7 courses right now. But then there's also those like weekly workshops that we're doing, lots of folks that are just sharing their work. So depending on like where you go, you can see a lot of things, and there's a lot of like different rabbit holes you could go down. And I like having this conversation because I think it will help others that are kind of newer to Verbal to Visual or newer to sketchnoting in general, to help them think through these same questions so that you kind of feel good about the direction that you're going and kind of how you're spending your time each day. That's like kind of moving you in a meaningful way toward your goals with sketchnoting. And maybe let's start there as within that realm of kind of goals. You mentioned you're on a break, but within a master's program. What was the subject matter of that master's program you mentioned?
It's humanistic studies.
Humanistic studies. And you mentioned that you consider yourself to be a visual learner. I may imagine stemming partially from dyslexia. What have been kind of like, have you already been using some visual tools? Have you added some visual learning tools to your kind of workflow already as a learner?
I've experimented with how do you call it? Like mind mapping using colors, and consistently using the same colors for meaning. So I assign meaning
Yeah,
to a specific color,
love
and
that.
making tiny, like if I have a mind map, I make tiny drawings next to the words. And the course I did that for was one of the courses I actually liked most because I could remember much and see my progress. So I've experimented in that way, but somehow this seems more elaborate um, than what I tried back then.
Yeah. Yeah. And would you say too that it's primarily within the realm of your studies that you would like to apply sketchnoting? It's like within that master's program, the courses you're taking, the things you're learning. Is that kind of the main um, purpose?
Yeah, definitely. For now, I mean, it's the perfect opportunity to learn it. But if I would be working, then I would say, yeah, it's for my work. But now,
Yeah.
because I'm studying, it's perfect because also maybe the information load is equal, if not higher, than when you're working. At least maybe the kind of work I tend towards. So with the amounts of information, if I can transfer or translate that all into sketchnoting, then I could take it wherever I go. So the moment is perfect, so I think.
Yeah, I like that because I do really, consider this skill of sketchnoting to be a lifelong skill, and to have a little bit of space to develop this skill now, and then like be able to apply it real soon whenever you kick back up. When do you resume that master's program?
In like 10 weeks.
Okay,
So it's quite
nice.
a lot of space right now.
Yeah, that's a great period of time to uh, be able to explore something like this specific skill here.
Yeah.
Um, Great. And it sounds like you've already got like a decent foundation, having explored a little bit of mind mapping, some small drawings, and some color.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I can imagine too that I like that you're starting with the intro course because I think that's a good kind of foundation setting sequence of activities and skill building. And the purpose of that intro course and most of the other courses too, but really that one is trying to kind of slowly direct you toward a sketchnoting process that's kind of like well suited to your primary purpose, your primary application of
Mm,
these skills. So with that as kind of one of the guiding principles, maybe knowing that this is the thing we're working toward, that process has different pieces to it, right? There's like
mm,
deciding on what materials you'd like to work with, and in addition to the breakdown of like, okay, do you lean towards analog tools versus digital tools, there's like that decision to make. But then within each of those
mm.
categories there are like plenty of branches that you can go down as you get more kind of specific. But
Yeah.
then another kind of dynamic that you want to kind of like merge well with your materials is kind of like the constraints that you put on the note-taking process itself. So like some of the branches here is there's like, okay, there's the analog versus digital. Constraints is kind of like, okay, maybe there's a few fonts you use, maybe you use color in specific ways. You have a particular approach to layout. If you like mind mapping, you could continue like mind mapping is your main approach to layout. And then how you weave in imagery. These are kind of like
Mm,
the four, you might have seen this already within the intro course, but like these are kind of the four core skills of sketchnoting that I think
mm.
about, um,
Yeah.
and how you kind of weave those together with your the tools that you feel like are the best fit, uh, and weave that together in the learning situation to hopefully create a valuable process for you.
Yeah.
Um, So that's kind of what I hope that the intro course is guiding you toward. Does that feel like kind of a helpful direction for you to be heading? Kind of like um, it's a little bit of a combo of there's some skill building activities along the way, but what that's
Mm.
gearing you toward is this somewhat like unified sketchnoting process that you feel like fits well for you. Is that a
Yeah.
good direction to be moving?
Yeah, definitely. I right now I'm noticing that I'm actually learning and thinking about creating um, my own fonts and the layout, um, which is already making me question like how I wrote before was never really, it was ingrained, but it was there was no
Mm,
meaning to how I write, and now I can
right.
make a new font which has meaning. Um, so I already like that a lot. Um, and then I think I am at the point now that I've so far I've created four fonts, or is it fonts? Like the styles, header, the
Yeah.
emphasis words, the core, that I will use, I think, for studies, but a lot more,
Nice.
and keep it to that basis, so I don't, like, that's my constraint just for right now, because otherwise I
Yeah.
can think of so many more, and then there's no learning to it.
What's the
Um,
fourth one? You mentioned header, emphasis, core.
um, yeah, so if I think about um, how I take notes during studies, I always need like this core title of what that sketchnoting session or that college class, the class is about. So that
Hmm,
will be the title.
gotcha.
Then I have emphasis words and core, but then also headers, which is
Gotcha.
like, you have a title and then header, and then
Yeah.
within the core
Nice.
you have emphasis words.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the hierarchy is probably like this as far as like, you've got the title of the course itself.
Yeah,
The next layer down is kind of the headers, different sections within that course.
yeah.
And then from there, you're mainly using your core font, but occasionally throwing in the emphasis font if you want to
Yeah.
highlight a few. That's great.
Yeah. Um, I had a question.
Yeah.
While learning this, and maybe I know the answer already, but so far, um, like I have maybe 3 days a week to sit behind my computer and work at this consistently for 3 hours. And then throughout the other days, I try to apply it here and there, but it's
Hmm.
it's it's minimal so far. How would you say to mm, like get it ingrained in your system to divide the time? Is 3 days enough, or would you say 7 days, but then for 30 minutes is better?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. And currently, you said it's 3 hours on each of those 3 days. So kind of
Yeah,
9 hours
yeah,
total.
yeah.
Um, I like that, and that's during this break period, I imagine. So um,
Hmm.
yeah, eventually that that will be less, right? Once you go back into the program.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my initial thought is like those are good chunks of time. Um, and I think I like sticking with the current structure of having those 3 hours, 3 days a week, as opposed to
Mm,
smaller chunks more spread out. Because what I could imagine you doing is with each of those 3 hours, my first thought is to break those 3 hours down into three chunks. So maybe in like the first hour is you're doing coursework. So working through the lessons, like within verbal to visual, using that structure to kind of get you going, uh, support some skill building, help you think through things. I would then probably spend the second hour on like a sketchnoting session. Like no matter what details you already have kind of decided upon as far as your system goes, you will still be like building out the details of this system, but even before it's like fully specified, you can still pull up a podcast or a YouTube video, something, and you could choose if you want to stay in the mode of humanistic studies, you could pull up something related to that. Or if you would
Yeah.
rather like spend this kind of precious break time exploring other topics and interests, the specifics don't matter too much, other than sometimes staying close to humanistic studies probably would be valuable because you'd be building up visual vocabulary, something we talk about a lot. If some of these sketchnoting practice sessions are within the realm of humanistic studies, you'd begin building up your visual vocabulary in a way that's connected to that topic that I think will be helpful once you do go back into that program or once it
Yeah.
starts up
Yeah.
again. So that's what I'd probably do with the second hour. And then the third hour, I think would be a good time to kind of like reflect on how that sketchnoting session went and just do a little bit of kind of follow up, maybe like specific skill building. So let me refine this a little bit. It could be like a little bit of reflection on how the process went during that sketchnoting session. If you decide maybe like there were a few concepts that you tried to draw out during that session, but it didn't go so well, if you maybe want to do some like focused visual vocabulary building, for example, like you could use that third hour for some focus skill building, or you could even hop back into more coursework. So that feels kind of like a nice way to bookend the session. There's some like
Yeah.
intentional learning at the beginning and the end, in the first hour and the third hour. But in the middle, you're actually kind of putting yourself into the experience of sketchnoting, which I think is valuable and also like motivating to have real ideas that you're working with, right? You're not just
Yeah.
skill,
Yeah.
you're not just like building skills abstractly, you're taking in ideas that you're interested in, and using sketchnoting to work with those ideas. How does that,
Yeah.
and
So,
this of
so
course is just like an example breakdown, you could tweak that as much as you want, but any thoughts on that as a general structure?
yeah, definitely. So far, I've actually forgot or not even thought about the second part of within those 3 hours. I was somehow only thinking, oh, now I'm just going to do only coursework, and then outside of that, I'll practice, which happens limited during the other days.
Right.
Um, but having an hour of just putting up a podcast, which I listen to tons of it but never
Perfect.
think of, oh, let's sketch note. It's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I imagine, I think that's a common thing too, generally with like if folks are working through a course or reading a book, even just general like self-help books or anything, it's almost like the default and the easy thing to do to stay in you know the consumption of that course or the reading
Yeah.
of that
Yeah. Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
value in that, but like the thing that you're working towards is being able to put those things aside and just do the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Yeah. But
So
that's also the like when you're in the course, you're also avoiding having to work yourself and failing and
exactly.
trying and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's a different type of task. Like it's scarier, it's
Yeah.
more probably
Yeah.
like emotionally heavy potentially,
Yeah.
doing that actual sketchnoting.
Yeah.
But like kind of what you described too is a good way of lowering the pressure just by like throwing on a podcast that you would be listening to anyway. What I often think
Yeah.
about, like
Yeah.
and I feel like I haven't mentioned this in a while, but um, I think a helpful kind of mental comparison to make is consider what most people typically do when listening to a podcast. They probably like just listen to it while they're out on a walk or in the car or whatever. And that's like a great experience. You get to listen to it, enjoy the ideas. You're probably thinking about things while it's going on, but you're not creating anything while doing that listening. if you then like choose to do any form of sketchnoting while listening to that podcast, it's so much more of an active engagement with that material. And no matter what the thing looks like that you end up creating or sketching out, the difference in impact and engagement between those two ends of that spectrum of just listening versus doing any form of sketchnoting, like the impact curve, I think like goes up dramatically between those two, no matter what your sketch notes look like. So I hope I mentioned that as a way of like taking some of that pressure off of those sketchnoting sessions, and to try to have fun with it as well and like not take it too seriously. That's a trap we fall into. I fall into a lot, taking myself or my work too seriously. Pull back on that a little bit. But then having that back and forth of those sketchnoting sessions and then coming back to that coursework to get back to some skill building. I think that back and forth sounds really great.
Yeah, yes, definitely. Also, I think in the practice session, you notice where you're, I don't know, lacking or it's not going as smoothly as you want to. And those are the things then to put in part 3 of the, how you say, work, the daily structure.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I think I think that the closer you are to a like real sketchnoting session, the more meaningful those instructional materials will be, right? Because like, yeah, if you just work through all the coursework, it'll be valuable and helpful. But by going back and forth between coursework, sketchnoting session, coursework, sketchnoting session, I imagine that the coursework and the lessons, there might be more aha moments because you have that practical experience with the actual thing, with the sketchnoting sessions. So I like how you mentioned that, how that sketchnoting session can inform and maybe make those the next skill building or next little bit of coursework more meaningful potentially.
If there's time, I have one more question.
Yeah. Bring it in.
Well, maybe you have a video on this or it comes later in the course, but what happens often when I'm trying either to make a mind map during class or trying to write down what happens in the podcast, it's the overflow of information that I'm trying to keep up with rather than I'm listening to what I want to learn and remember and creating a sketch note from that. And how do you keep up with what is being told, but you don't want to remember everything, but only get out what you want yourself without having this feeling you're falling behind.
Yeah, no, I think you've hit on kind of one of the core challenges of live or real-time sketchnoting. What I appreciate about how you asked that question too is that paying attention to the intent going in. So I think you've already seen the idea of intent as a filter. I talk about that pretty early on within the intro course, just to help you decide what it is that you actually want to capture while you're listening, or reading, or taking in whatever it is you're taking in. I think another piece of that intent can be around whether you're just interested in capturing even just like personal highlights versus something more comprehensive. And what might be like the distinctioning element there is, if you're just listening to podcasts for your own enjoyment, then you can stick to those like personal highlights. And even if you get to information overload, if you start to feel that coming up while you're listening to the podcast and sketchnoting, I think you kind of have two options. You could either like pause, because you do have that option to pause the podcast and like catch up a little bit with your mind map and then hit play again. Or you could just let it go and give yourself permission to not worry about capturing whatever it is that you miss while you're kind of completing the last idea. Like, it's okay if you don't get that chunk. So I would kind of maybe pick up front too, getting back to like your intent and having a plan and some constraints up front. Just kind of make a decision at the beginning before you start the podcast and the sketchnoting session. Decide if you do get to that place of information overflow, do I want to hit pause or do I want to just let it go and not worry about missing a few ideas? I think those are your main options if you're going with like the personal highlights while listening to a podcast. It might be worthwhile to think too about comparing and contrasting that to something where you do want to be a little more comprehensive in what you're capturing, which is probably going to be the case in your coursework. In that case, when you know you need to be comprehensive, that might impact like maybe the level of visual detail on your first capture. So that might mean that, if you're in a lecture and obviously you can't pause a lecture, ideas are coming quick. You could use, if you decide to go the digital approach, you could use an app like Notability, which has this cool feature where you can record audio while you're sketchnoting. And like those two things are synced up. So when you go back later to look at that, you can tap any part of your sketch note and it will start playing the audio from the time when you were sketching out that specific part. That's a really cool thing about Notability, which probably makes it the best app for anybody in a school setting. So there's that benefit of a digital tool like that. But if you don't want to go down that route, to kind of keep up with the lesson, it might be shorter captures in the moment, but then maybe after class or like later that evening, you go back and do a little bit more kind of like organizing of the mind map, right? So maybe that's what the second stage could look like. Second stage is where you organize the mind map a little bit better and maybe add more drawings to it, for example. Does that give you some ideas for how to approach information overload?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Which of those kind of options and routes sounds most appealing to you right now?
I think the one where I just allow myself not to have to write everything down. Because the small moments where that has happened, the course gets more interesting because I'm only picking up what really interests me. It's like my ears are open, but I only write down what resonates with me, and those are the things that I want to learn anyway. And if I focus on everything, it's like, what do I even want to learn?
Yeah, I like that. And what I think that highlights too is the things that you do capture. Like if you think about a situation where you're sketchnoting a podcast and you're getting to that place of information overload, you're doing your best to get, as many of those interesting ideas to you down. If you get to that place of information overload, you probably already have enough ideas on the page that you can work with, that again kind of like offsets what you don't capture in the next little bit. Like there's already plenty that you've captured that you can follow up with in some form, like after the podcast. So there comes a point when getting more ideas on the page might not even be that helpful for you. And when it comes to like following up on those ideas and incorporating them into your work or your life, whatever you're doing. So that's a helpful thing to think about also.
Yeah, definitely.
Good questions. Yeah, I think those were a couple of great specific questions to explore. Both I think this piece about like how to structure the time you have available to you. I think that's a great thing for everyone to think about as they're developing their sketchnoting skills. And it's great you already had like kind of a schedule and some time blocks, and it was just a matter of how might we kind of chunk up those times and what to do with them. I encourage listeners or folks watching this to do the same thing. And then that specific question of information overload, which every sketchnoter comes up against,
Yeah.
coming up with a plan for how you want to handle that information overload is kind of, I think, what it's all about. Because again, like that, having a plan in place, and I feel like I haven't even like addressed, this makes me want to specifically, like, this term information overload is so such an apt description, because if you don't have a plan for it, once it hits, which it like inevitably will at some point in your sketchnoting process, it almost like is a stop sign. It's like a
Yeah.
wall that, like, if you don't have a plan for it before, it's like, what do I do? I'm stressed. It's like it
Yeah.
causes you to freeze up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
but even just having a little bit of a plan for, like, okay, if that happens, I'm going to give myself permission to do this or do that, and then just keep going.
Yeah.
That is something that also I think will resonate with others.
Mm.
So I really appreciate you bringing those questions in.
Yeah. Thanks for giving the answers. It really helps for the coming days and weeks to structure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And I look forward to hearing how it goes too. Feel free to kind of reach out again and share how this process is going. As always, you can kind of share your work. If you ever want to share some of the coursework or even the results of your sketchnoting sessions,
Yeah.
feel free to do that
Yes.
inside of Verbal to Visual, and throw any other questions that come up as you're doing that. If you hit a stumbling block as you kind of figure out your sketchnoting process here.
Mhm.
Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up our conversation?
No, I think to prevent information overload, I think
Good
this is
tie-in.
perfect.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. I love it. Great. Well, Renz, thanks for chatting, and good luck with everything from here.
Yeah, thank you, Doug.
I hope that you enjoyed that conversation and that it helped you to think about how you structure your time spent building and using your sketchnoting skills, and maybe having some of that balance of both the skill building and the actual application, doing some real sketchnoting sessions. And I hope it also helped you think through what you might do when you hit information overload in your work. That will come for you sooner or later. As I mentioned up front, these one-on-one coaching calls are available for everyone that joins Verbal to Visual. And I think they can be a great way to speed up your sketchnoting skill development and fit well alongside the courses and community components of Verbal to Visual as well. You can learn more and sign up at verbaltovisual.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to sharing another conversation with you next time. Till then.